Hello and welcome to this episode of GCS Inclusion. I'm the guest host today, Georgia Collis, streaming in from the Amsterdam office of GCS. And I'm delighted to be joined today by Sara Goff. Now, Sara is the global DEI manager at Sage, and they're going to be telling us a little bit about implementing inclusivity and practical measures everyone can take within an organization. So I'm just going to add Sara in now. There we go. Sara.
Hello.
Hello again. Thank you so much for joining us. We're really pleased to have you as part of this series. Perhaps you could start by giving just a quick introduction to yourself.
Yeah, and I'm also really pleased to be here having this conversation today. I'm looking forward to it. So yes, my name's Sara Goff. My pronouns are they and them, and I am the Senior Global Diversity, Equity and Inclusion Manager at Sage. If I'm honest, my role as a senior DI manager encompasses so much as an organisation. Sage operates in about 23 different countries, and it really just means that there is no day to day for me. Every day is different. My remit spans kind of our colleagues in South Africa, Germany, Austria, Iberia, France, North America, UK and Ireland, and because we're really at the start of our DEI journey at Sage, it means that there's so much going on that no 2 days are ever the same. We've got lots of great employee resource groups. It's a really exciting time in my role.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like a very diverse role in itself, and I think just the general idea of having so many different offices and countries involved must make it particularly exciting and challenging for you. But I think implementing DE&I across any organisation, let alone such a global one, can be quite difficult. And you, of course, take it by the helm as the global manager for that. But can you just tell us a little bit about who is the one taking sort of responsibility for that, and how that filters out throughout the organisation?
Oh, that is a really good question. I should say, I'm part of a small team. There's about 5 of us, and we support about 11,000 colleagues. So I can also already hear you going, hang on a second, how's a diversity, equity, and inclusion team of about 5 people going to actually make any change in the organisation? I think that's where, to kind of your question, really, when I think about diversity, equity, inclusion and how you make that change in a business, it's not about, like me as, one of the DEI team, owning diversity, equity, inclusion or gatekeeping it. It's really about encouraging that shared ownership, ultimately, to make the changes that we want to see, not only in the organisation or in parts of the business, but in a kind of wider society as well. We really need everyone to play their part. I know that sounds a little bit cheesy, but you have to bring everyone together, and you really you need the kind of the strength in numbers to be able to make the changes. So I think my answer when I think about who's responsible for DEI is, ideally I want to get to a point wherever I work to be able to say, actually it's everyone's responsibility, because everyone knows that they have that kind of part to play in helping the workplace be more inclusive. My role as kind of a DEI team member is really about empowering and kind of enabling, whether it's colleagues, whether it's senior leaders, parts of the business, to be able to practice inclusion, to be able to make bring more diversity into their workforce. It's not about me doing all of the work, it's about me supporting and enabling them to do the work.
Sure. And I think that, for everyone in this day and age, it's a continual learning process as we come to know more about, different groups. I think it's really great to have someone or a group of people who are perhaps a bit more informed and can really help lead and guide and enable, like you say, others within an organization, which is fantastic. So tell me, in general, about the expectations for DE&I, and how do you see that those have changed over the last few years, at least since you've been in industry, let's say?
Yeah, so I think even in the relatively short time I've been in a DEI role full time, so I moved into a DEI program manager role in 2018. I'd come from an HR business partner background with a focus on DEI, but knew I'd always wanted to get into there. But even I think in that kind of the last 4 years, I feel like there has been quite a significant shift in like candidate expectations, colleague expectations of actually, you want the organization that you work for, their values, their beliefs to really align with your personal values as well. You want to work for an organization that ultimately that cares. And I know that sounds a little bit cheesy, but I think
Yeah,
for me it's really, really important. I think that when I reflect on like the last couple of years as well, with the murder of George Floyd, with all of the Black Lives Matter protests, also
yeah,
with the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, I think that has clarified,
yeah,
crystallized maybe those expectations even more from colleagues or from employees, where they've gone, hang on a second, we now want you to do better. Well,
yeah.
I think it's becoming a real kind of point of attraction or retention, um, around the world, really, as to if you're not really thinking about how you can prioritize diversity, equity, inclusion, also kind of flexibility in terms of location, hours, in
Yeah.
terms of your culture and your employees' well-being. Actually, you might find that people decide they want to go elsewhere, or that you're not an employer of choice.
Sure. And I think, as you say as well, like with particular big political moments over the last few years and tragedies that have occurred, as well as the pandemic, we've seen such a shift in people's attitudes. You know, the remote working, as you say, it's allowed for a much more inclusive environment. And from a recruitment perspective, we see it so much more that, yeah, candidates are, they're asking more, they're demanding more, in fact, of potential employers to make sure that their values are matched and that they can see potential employers a real ally for things that they stand behind, which is really, really important, of course.
Oh, definitely, definitely. I think at that point about organizations being an ally, organizations by their very nature have so much power and
Yeah,
influence to be able to drive change, not just internally but externally as well. And I think you started to see that with the companies that that spoke out about the murder of George Floyd, and who then really started to think about how they brought in tangible change, around racial equity, and then conversely the organizations that didn't as well. So
yeah.
I think we're going to still keep seeing a lot of these kind of expectations from candidates, from employees, continue. I don't think it's going to be something that will revert back to how it was.
No, I would tend to agree, and definitely that's something that we're hoping for, that there's a new level of what the norm and what the at least the minimum expectation should be. And now it's really about how do we push way past the barrier of minimum expectations and create environments that are wholly inclusive, and hopefully that's the way the landscape's changing. But I think one thing that a lot of people are often curious about on a day-to-day is, when you're an employee, especially at a large organization, what are the day-to-day, the simple changes that you can make when you're not in a position of as much power or influence to really promote inclusivity and equality within a company, would you say?
Yeah, I think again, this is always a question that comes up where people go, "Well, I'm not a senior leader. I don't have the
Yeah,
power or the kind of ability to change this particular process or system."
sure.
But also, like, there's not that expectation. It's really about, as you say, what you as an individual can do, because there's always actions that everyone can take to be more inclusive every
Yeah,
day. And it's not like we're thinking about big steps here. It's just those small things. It's thinking about, when you're running meetings or you're setting up meetings, how are you being inclusive? Are you making sure that you're sending out the pre-reading the agenda to everyone ahead of
yeah,
time, so they have time to reflect on it, to think about it, depending on how they like to engage with meetings? Everyone that is able to be prepared, or if English isn't their first language, then again, people have
sure.
time to reflect as well, to be able to come to that meeting with as much kind of knowledge and ability to know what you want to get out of it. I think there's also, when I think about, just thinking about inclusive meetings as well, it's about in that meeting checking that everyone, not only is able to contribute, that you say to people, there are multiple ways you might want to engage today. You might want to, unmute yourself. You might want to pop something in the chat. You might want to, send me a private message. You've got those options. But it's also then about making sure that everyone is heard and listened to. It's not just, oh, we've
Yeah.
got the same voices, but it's like, make sure that everyone's voices are listened to. And then also think about, if you're thinking about, decision making, actually, whose voices weren't in this conversation? Who else do I need to go and talk about this with? Again, I think in the last few years, we've also seen the rise of employee resource groups within organisations. And if you have one of those, again, they're a really great way to start getting involved in DEI, where it's a space where you can go, you can have conversations, again, depending on what the group is, get involved with their activity. It's not going to, take up a lot of time, but it's, again, about those small actions that you might not think make a difference, but that all add up, really. I think another one I always think about is language, in terms of, when you first meet someone, thinking about, okay, how did they say their name? What pronouns did they use to introduce themselves? How do they talk about their identity? And then making sure that you respect and you use that same language rather than ignoring it or not listening to it. And again, usually it's a small thing, but actually to the person, when you say someone's name correctly, or whether you get their right pronouns, actually it makes a big difference. It's again, it's about thinking about those small things that you can do that, it's and I think another one, sorry, is also really, I think, education. It's actually thinking about, what do you know about yourself and your own kind of privilege, how can you then use that for good? Thinking about, oh, actually, I don't know enough about a particular topic around DEI. Let me go and have a look, find out what I can see. The internet is massive. There's so much information out there. But again, lots of organizations now also have training for their employees around DEI. Do you want to start there, or have a conversation with your DEI team and ask more as well? I think there's always, for me, that piece about really being curious and having that growth mindset, where it's okay that you don't have all the answers, but it's then about putting the work in to start to try and learn some of this. And no one expects you to know everything or even be a DEI expert. That's not it. But it's just about going, oh, okay, I could learn a bit more about this, and then being able to bring that back into conversations or whatever you're doing.
Context. We mentioned it earlier, this idea of continuous education and things like that, and I think that's such an important part of our growth process in this day and age. As you said, the internet is full of resources, groups. It's not just about sort of waiting for a situation, perhaps, and to then think, I didn't know. Of course, that can happen. But like you say, really proactively trying to involve yourself and see, what is this that I, don't understand, and how can I try and implement this into my daily life, meetings, making different things inclusive. And I know for myself, there were certain moments over the last few years where I was sort of taken aback a bit and thought, gosh, I really didn't understand that. How can I take the time to learn and improve, and then better myself and improve the way that I address people, include people in meetings, those sort of things. So I think it's great. And you mentioned the ERGs. That's something that I didn't know a huge amount about, to be honest, about what ERGs are. And I think there's probably quite a few people that don't know. Have you got some key examples, perhaps from Sage or?
Yeah, absolutely. So ERGs, also known as employee resource groups, although really they can have lots of different names. So in Sage, we actually call them colleague success networks, just because we really focus on the colleague success element side. So for Sage, and this is pretty standard across kind of any organization, is that group is basically a group of colleagues who volunteered at the end of their desk. So it's not part of their day-to-day job to basically set up a network. So it's a community of colleagues who
Yeah.
come together around like a shared identity, a demographic, and or like a lived experience. So at Sage,
Okay.
we've got, for example, we've got a family at Sage network, which is all about families, different types of families, but it's
Okay.
basically it provides that community where those employees can come together, they can have conversations, they can also amplify their kind of shared amplify their voices and kind of share their kind of lived experiences and their challenges back to
Yeah.
the business, back to the DEI team, which we can then go, right, now we know about this, we can get this resolved. And then also
Sure.
from the other side of things, um, it's also about, as a DEI team, for example, we go to those employee resource groups and say, actually, we're thinking of making this change, or we're thinking of doing this differently, or bringing in this policy. And actually, we really, really want to hear your voice in this conversation. We want your insight as this
Yeah.
community. So they're they're kind of a really great opportunity for the employees to firstly network, meet other colleagues, especially
Yeah.
when everyone's
Be part of
virtual. It's
the
always a bit more
community.
difficult,
Sure.
but it's also a really great place for those employees to kind of get more like personal and professional development experiences within a safe environment, because all of these networks have their own leads as well. They have again other employees with particular roles around like communications or
Yeah.
working with our kind of charity part of the business. So yeah, at Sage, we've got our Pride at Sage, which is our LGBTQ plus focused ERG. We've got
Great.
Gender Alliance, which focuses on marginalized gender. I mean, we could go on, but again, they're just it's it's a again another great way for employees to be able to get involved in
Definitely.
what matters to them and be able to help
Yeah.
make that difference in the business and use their voice, definitely.
And I think how fantastic if you're a potential, employee looking at joining a company like Sage, and you can see there are groups which represent you, your community, your interests. I think that's incredibly welcoming, but also, as you say, gives you really a platform to use your voice, discuss with colleagues, and bring a little bit more to your role than what it might be just the day to day of it. So a really, really, really wonderful opportunity. I'm just sort of going through and thinking, we've discussed a couple of things and like ways in which that people can implement more diversity and inclusivity in their day to day. But you're obviously very actively involved with this in your daily role, talking with your team and with colleagues. Are there big things that you sit down and you hope and work towards? This is what we want to see within Sage in the coming years. We want to see this change, for example. What would those main things be for you?
Oh, if I'm honest, that's a really, really timely question, because we rolled out our current 3-year DEI strategy back in December.
Okay.
And when I think about, the next 3 years, the next even 5 years, I think it comes back to what we were talking about at the start, really, along the lines of shared ownership. For
Yeah.
me, I think ultimately that's one of the real foundations of DEI work anywhere is you need everyone in the organization to really understand the business case for DEI and then want to get involved. And again, there's so many different ways that everyone can do that. Not everyone is a senior leader with, all of that kind of power and influence that comes with, but it's about really being able to, you know, bring everyone together, have that shared ownership. I think for me, that would be a real a kind of a real kind of key ambition over the next couple of years, for it to be a question
Yeah.
of, if you're asked who's responsible for DEI, that anyone just says I am,
Me.
across the business.
Yeah.
um, and I think probably another key one is data. I think
Okay.
it's when I kind of talk about data, I'm always thinking about, how are we measuring what the programs we're running, the initiatives we're running, how are
Yeah.
we then thinking about the impact? Because ultimately the goal here is to really make sustainable long-term change, and we need
Yeah.
to be able to understand whether what we're doing is having the desired impact, and then be able to continue doing that, or change, or stop altogether, depending on what that data says. And also from that data perspective, it's also the data that we are actually receiving from our employees as well. So it's making sure that our employees feel able to share, their concerns. Kind of back to thinking about, how can, anyone get involved in, practicing inclusion in the workplace. Another way is speaking up if something doesn't seem quite right. Is it a policy you're not quite sure of, or this particular system or this process that feels like it's got lots of barriers in? And it's then about making sure that, all those employees are able to use their voice to be able to say, actually, can we have a look at this particular system that doesn't work, and for them to then be listened to and that to be acted on. So I think there's kind of two elements of data around making sure that we're measuring the impact of what we're doing, but also about really encouraging that feedback, that data to us, to be able to focus on the priorities that are at the forefront of our employees' minds.
Fantastic. Yeah, I mean, it's invaluable to use your own employees as a resource for, how have our different changes made an impact to you, positively, negatively, and to then really build off that. And I think that's something that again, people really expect from their employers, these days, that if you do speak out, which for a lot of people can be quite an intimidating, nerve-wracking moment, it's hopefully having that safer space to say, to express your feelings and to then be listened to. Absolutely.
Yeah, definitely.
Sarah, thank you so much for joining us today. I see that we're running just a little over time. It's been really, really informative, certainly for me, and I hope for other people that might have tuned in today. It's great to see these active changes and to learn new things every day. And this is wonderful that we have this series through GCS Connect to speak to different people like yourself, and really get a broader idea of what can be done and what's being done currently. So thank you again so much for joining us, and hopefully we'll speak again in the future.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks a lot, Sarah. Bye-bye.